Good. All right, are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Is the font big enough in the terminal? Should I make that bigger?
Maybe slightly bigger.
Okay. So today I'm talking about upgrading the Postgres in the charts from 10 to 11. So a user has an existing GitLab installation that has Postgres 10, which you can see we have here on the left. I've already got a GK, a GitLab chart up and going that has Postgres 10.9. We're running GitLab 12.10. To make this a little more real, I created a couple test projects here so we can see that when we back them up and then restore them, they are restored correctly. All right, and up here in the upper right, you can see we've got, this is the view of the namespace that's running the cluster in K9S, and I'll be typing commands here in the lower right. So the first thing I want to do as administrator to upgrade Postgres is to run the pre-migration step. And so this is actually a script that comes out of the GitLab charts repo. You can see it's gated here by version. This script will change for 4.0, so users will be using this. But for the demo, I'm using the 3.3 chart. And so if I run this, basically what it's doing is running a command inside the task runner pod, which is right here, to dump the database and then store that back up into the min.io that's running inside the cluster. So this doesn't take very long here, especially since we only have 2 projects. So I'm just waiting to finish for this on the lower right to finish. There's a point here. Yeah, well, it's packing it up. It doesn't say anything. But you can see here, this S3 link is where the backup is stored in min.io. And so we've created a database backup. Now we're going to delete the database from the running GitLab and then rerun the Helm chart to update to Postgres 11, and then we'll restore this backup. Okay, so now that we have a backup, we can do something that might be a little scary in other circumstances. We need to delete the Postgres stateful set. So the stateful set for Postgres was introduced in the 3.0 version of the chart. Previous to that, we had been using deployments for Postgres, which means that if you updated the version of Postgres and redeployed it, it would work fine because it would just delete the deployment, create a new deployment with the tag, and then launch new pods. But since we're using a stateful set now for Postgres, that means it has persistent volumes attached. So if you delete the Postgres stateful set, it will come back up with that volume attached, which is a problem here because Postgres 10 stored data in a different format than Postgres 11. And if you try to start Postgres 11 with Postgres 10 data, it will just complain and the pod will never start. So here we're looking at the Postgres stateful set. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. Deleting a stateful set does not delete the persistent volume claims, because the reasoning here from the Kubernetes docs is that somebody might typo delete the stateful set on accident when you don't want to lose data. But in this case, we do want to lose data. So I'm going to delete the persistent volume claim here. All right, so now if we go back and look at the pods in the chart, there is no Postgres here. You can see on the left, if I try to refresh the page, not going so good. So this is there is some downtime here when upgrading Postgres. So now that we have a backup, now that the old Postgres is gone, we're gonna update to Postgres 10. You can see here my values file I'm using for this. It's pretty simple. Got my domain set up. You always need cert manager. Actually, this is the wrong one. Postgres 11. Yep. So we're going from 10.9.0 to 11.7.0. So clear that. For this demo, I'm using the same version of the chart, but this is simulating what will happen when users upgrade to 4.0. Now I'm running Helm upgrade install, so we should see a Postgres pods to start up again here as the stateful set is recreated and the persistent volumes are recreated.
Hey, Dustin, did you have to delete the Postgres stateful set, or was it just to make the upgrade process a little cleaner?
You mean as opposed to just deleting the PVCs?
Yeah, I was just curious if you could have just left the Postgres 10 stateful set there, and if Helm would have correctly removed it and replaced it with 11.
Well, I did try that. I was running into issues with the PVCs reattaching correctly, but that might have been a GKE sort of transitory issue. I think in order to get it to work right every time, just deleting the stateful set and the PVC seems to work all the time.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Really, the provider should be complaining if you're trying to delete something that's mounted. So in terms of sanity, even though you're going to delete the disk, you should really shut down the program attached to it so that the subsystems know it's okay because it's not in use.
Okay. That makes sense. All right, so here you can see we have a Postgres pod again. If I refresh the page on the left, it still isn't working because we haven't. There's two steps to the backup. There's the pre-step where you create the backup, and then the restore step. So now we will do the restore step, which looks very similar to the. You can see here on the end of the line we have this pre command, so we just change that to post. Run that again. So this is creating a config map to track this process, stopping processes that depend on the database, unpacking the backup, loading that into Postgres, running migrations, and then restarting those services. And at the end of this process, we should be able to load the page on the left again, and then see that everything is working as fine, and we're now running Postgres 11 with our data restored. Okay, so it looks like that's all done. It's like Unicorn's restarting, but after Unicorn restarts, we should be good to go. I should note that this is using 333 of the chart. This changes to GitLab Web Service in 4.0. And that script that I mentioned that we're curling to bash updates that as well. That's why it's important that we don't just serve one version of that script, but we keep the GitLab tag on it. So if you're trying to run a 4.0 migration, you're running the 4.0 script. Let's go on in here. Okay. All right. So here on the left, we see we have the UI back. We have our test 1 and test 2 projects. If I look in the admin area, you can see now that we are running Postgres 11.7. So this is a manual process, and I assume that most of us would rather not have our users have to go through manual processes, but there's only a few steps in this process, and it does involve getting rid of data, or not moving data around, so there's a little more risk to it. Ordinarily, I wouldn't say that is a reason to not automate something, but I think at least us getting it down to 4 steps is pretty manageable. One thing I did run into here, and I've opened an issue on it, is that for some reason, if you are using a self-signed certificate from MinIO, the task runner pod doesn't know about that certificate, and then when you try to run backups or restore, it'll just fail with an SSL warning. There's a documented workaround for this, which is to exec into the task runner pod and edit the S3 CFG file to not use HTTPS in the pod, which is not such a great workaround. So that's something we can follow up with in the future. All right, well, that's a backup and restore. Does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns about this workflow?
Yeah, I don't think we could really get any safer. We need to have that safety step of run the backup, know that you have a good copy of it first, and then delete the PVC. If we do fully automate it, we have a lot of edge cases to watch out for.
Mm-hmm.
Admittedly, this only comes into play if you're actually running our deployed version of Postgres, which we don't currently recommend as an actual production database. That might change in the future, so we need to be aware of that. But all the same, in the off chance that somebody is currently using ours after 3.0, then we really need to be really, really careful with data. So.
Yep. And I think this is something we can expect for Postgres 12 as well, right? If you have a Postgres 11 data directory, we might have to do something similar for 12. But we'll get to that when we get to it.
Do we have any good ways to validate that the backup is complete and verifies that the all the data is there?
The only way is really to do it twice, see if they match.
Oh, right. Yeah, one of the things I was trying to get a little more visibility on while I was working on this was the MinIO pod, but apparently their logs are kind of an all or nothing thing where either you get no logs or you get way too many logs.
Yeah.
So there is somewhat of a lack of visibility into this process.
Yeah, I'm not sure I fully. I mean, I hear what you're saying, Jason, about doing two backups and comparing them, but I'm not sure that's necessarily a good way to do it, because if I get a bad backup the first time, if I do the exact same thing, I may potentially get the same bad backup. I don't know if there's I don't know if there's a good way. The only way I can conceive of it is if we had something that would then afterwards go poke the database and then compare what's in the backup. And I'm not sure I'd want to go say every single value, because that's time consuming, but I don't know.
That problem is something that we have to solve in PostgreSQL, because really we just use pgdump.
Okay.
So if pgdump failed spectacularly, then that's one problem. If we ran pgdump and it failed and we failed to catch that it failed, that's our problem.
Right.
So we should be sure that pgdump, when executing, is actually going to throw us an error if it fails, and we react to that. But if pgdump itself says all is well and your content is not all is well, I literally have no idea what to do there. And maybe we should poke a database team member for that. Because that's a fair question on Omnibus or the CNG. Like, if pgdump says it ran and it says it's good, how do we prove it is good?
What's the old sysadmin adage? Backups are easy, restores are hard, right?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. Well, that's all I had for today, unless there's any other questions or comments.
Actually, I have a quick question for you.
Mm-hmm.
I can go look this up, but we have it on recording, so why not? Can you go tell me what URL the task runner is using to access the MinIO instance?
Yes, but how would I see that?
Shell into the primary container and cat.s3 config, .s3 cfg.
Yep. This was the file I was talking about having to edit if your SSL stuff is off.
Okay, so this points at the external URL. So one thing we can do here is, if you're actually using MinIO, one, just not worry about SSL at all and point directly at the internal endpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That completely bypasses that problem entirely, which might actually make sense if you're using MinIO inside of your deployment. I say that because for the runner to hit that URL, it actually has to go out, turn around, and come back in Nginx ingress. So it's actually less efficient if you're using a fully self-contained install than to just go directly at the pod.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
yeah, and I mean, I mean, even if it is internal, I think you would still have TLS on. But
nope.
If it was using the internal endpoint, like, it would be nice if we had a way of telling the task runner that, you know, since the same CA is signing all of the internal certs, then the task runner should be able to trust that self-signed min.io internal is fine.
Yeah. Now, I definitely agree that this should have both the self-signed certificates and the entirety of the custom CA logic. If it doesn't, that's a bug. Like, ouch, bug. Okay. But I would point out that if you're reaching the internal endpoint, it does not serve HTTPS.
Okay, because it's only doing that because it's proxying port 9000 through Nginx.
Correct.
Okay.
Nginx is doing the TLS termination for us. min.io, at least in the past, I haven't looked at the most recent versions, did not directly support SSL on its own.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's something to look into then. I mean, I hope they do at this point, because with all of, like the news coverage of people leaving their Elasticsearch and whatever clusters open, I could see someone leaving a min.io cluster open like that.
Let's see. Actually, it looks like they have now added the ability to do that. I did a quick search. And they do have the ability to actually serve their own SSL at this point. We're still likely not to do it inside of our chart at this point because Nginx is expected to be the termination. And we're expecting whatever provides Nginx or the ingress to do that termination. We're not doing mutual TLS across services. And for those people that are, they're making use of Istio.
All right. Okay.
So I'm not against implementing it. I'm just saying, let's look into it, but we can't currently make it a hard requirement.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, anything else?
Sounds like a wrap. Thanks for putting this together, Dustin.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. See ya.